This episode is brought to you by Sabio, the #1 coding bootcamp for veterans. Visit sabio.la/military to learn more. And welcome to another Fast Take. I'm Rod Rodriguez.
I'm Jack Murphy.
And we are talking about the last two episodes. Originally, it was supposed to be one really long episode, but we decided to break it up for you guys because an hour and a half it's kind of a hard ask, no matter how good the topic was. So we broke it up into two parts. Part one, part one was about kind of like the background, the history of our engagements, our relationship with North Korea. And the second part, really our guest, Dave Maxwell, Special Forces, former Special Forces officer, now a scholar. Am I right?
Yeah, he works at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, I believe it is, FDD in Washington. So yeah, I mean, he is an academic, super smart guy, obviously on Korea specifically. He knows a lot, but also as a first Special Forces group, spent a lot of time in Asia, knows a lot about the Philippines and some of the other places around there as well.
So Dave brought it home on the second part of it, kind of bringing us back into the current view. Really, what is our current relationship with North Korea look like? Why does it look that way? And what I thought was really interesting too was the perspective of South Koreans on our relationship with North Korea. I did not know that the South Koreans kind of view it as well, that's an issue between you two guys. Like we're here in the South, we're kind of doing our thing. We've got our K-pop, we've got our our own thing going on here. You and the North Koreans need to figure this out. They kind of tell me if I'm wrong, but it kind of looks like they feel like they're kind of caught in the middle.
Yeah, which I can understand to some extent. It's also there's some generational issues involved. It's not like when North Korea was split from South Korea, the peninsula was cut in half. I mean, it cut families in half, cut the culture in half. But now we have generations of young people in South Korea who have no firsthand memory of a united Korea, right? It's always been like this. So it's not to say that it doesn't matter to them, but it's probably not as pressing an issue as it was, for their grandparents.
History is always interesting to me. Sometimes it can be a little bland. It's so detached. Especially today, I'm detached from 2 weeks ago. As fast as everything moves, the internet, social media. I mean, 2 weeks ago does feel like forever ago. And then we talk about something that happened in 1930 to people that are long dead, long over. But in Korean culture, history is important, way more important than I think it is in American culture. Grievances, family, family reputation, names, like you just said, there was this line divided, families separated, entire generations of people that have experienced the Korean War and the subsequent repercussions from it. They've experienced it very differently. When the first episode, we're discussing how we got to where we are now. There is some background there on how Kim Jong-il's father got to where he was. And I thought that was kind of interesting when we think about revolutions. We think about communism, people's revolutions. China saw something very similar around the same time period, I think. Maybe my history is a little effed up here, but either way, revolutions, communist revolutions, people's revolutions kind of lead to these types of situations where we put one person on a pedestal and hold them up, and then everything kind of seems to go to hell from that.
Yeah, you see it over and over where these leaders become, as they age, they become parodies of themselves, right? Like Robert Mugabe, Kim Jong-un, right now, Vladimir Putin. They start off as this sort of project this strongman image, and as they get older, they just kind of become increasingly this joke. But still, they're they are, sometimes in charge of nuclear stockpiles, as is the case in North Korea.
And that's an interesting point, because one of the things that Dave talks about that, again, I really didn't think about it in this perspective, was the acquiring of nuclear weapons. I always thought North Korea was trying to get nuclear weapons, so they had nuclear weapons, so they were, big boy on the block. We're playing at the big boy table, but really, it's about the fact that if I get nuclear weapons, you're not going to invade me.
Oh, yeah.
You're not going to depose me. There's a lot more here at stake. And that's really it. We think about nuclear weapons as offensive material, offensive weaponry, but really it's a defensive weapon. It's a deterrent. It keeps you safe from being attacked.
Yeah, absolutely. In the North Korean regime, their prime, as Dave points out, their primary task is regime preservation. That's what they're involved in. And they all learned lessons from Saddam Hussein and Omar Gaddafi, right? These were people who gave up their WMD programs. If they hadn't, they may still be around today, right? And both of those situations are complicated in their own right. Like Saddam unilaterally destroyed his WMDs, but we still used WMDs as a pretext to dispose of him. Gaddafi had a WMD program through the 80s into the 90s, and he voluntarily gave them up through political negotiations. And had he kept his WMDs, maybe he'd still be around today. And that's, what does that say? Is that sort of an indictment on our foreign policy? There's different ways to look at that, right?
Nuclear diplomacy.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. As you said, it certainly acts as a deterrent. There's no question about that.
And to your point, we're seeing the strongman archetype being repeated. It's being repeated again with Putin, who's literally doing the same thing. He's pushed his agenda out there. He's dropped not so subtle hints about nuclear weapons, but it's really about don't come after me, because there could be some consequences, which is why that annexation of parts of Ukraine by Russia and that, really faux victory thing that they did, like, we've liberated this part. Well, now they're saying that's Russia. And if you come try and take it back, well, now you're provoking Russia. You're not fighting to defend yourself. You are taking an offensive posture.
Or they're saying that this is now sovereign Russian territory that you're conquering. It's a fait accompli. But the interesting thing is that working by, with, and through the Ukrainians, we've clapped back pretty hard. You're seeing their ships getting blown up. You're seeing their tanks getting blown up. You're seeing these offensives that are pushing the Russians back. They're really being humiliated on the battlefield. And of course, not that Putin seems to care, but the bodies of Russian soldiers are stacking up. And it's like, well, okay, we can play that game too. It's like, here's what we're doing up your boys right now. What are you going to do about it? And Putin so far has just been on this. He hasn't escalated to WMDs, knowing that's going to be a red line, that our policy will then shift to regime change in Moscow. So you're in a very interesting situation that is unprecedented in so many ways, where two nuclear powers, even through proxy, are squaring off with one another in Eastern Europe. And it seems that what happens in Ukraine kind of stays in Ukraine to a certain extent. Like, as long as you don't have NATO forces directly involved, or you don't have NATO forces, bombing Russian forces, be it in Ukraine or elsewhere, it seems like just kind of goes on, right? Like,
yeah,
just kind of, they're just kind of tit for tat.
If you're considering a career in software engineering, I recommend checking out Sabio, a coding bootcamp and developer community that's trained veterans since 2013. In just 17 weeks of remote learning, you'll graduate ready to start a real high-paying job. Sabio alumni are working at companies like Google, Amazon, and Microsoft. Sabio can kickstart your career in tech today. Visit sabio.la/military to learn how you can use your VA benefits to enroll. That's sabio.la/military. Check the show notes for the link. So, Reuters reported North Korea fires 23 missiles, one landing off South Korean coast for the first time. It's quote, it was the first time a ballistic missile had landed near the South's waters since the peninsula was divided in 1945. The most missiles fired by the North in a single day. And the South Koreans, they issued an air raid warning on the South Korean island. And the South Korean president vows North Korea will, quote, pay the price, unquote. Everybody talks big game, man. I love this when we do stuff like this. Like everyone's like, you will pay the price, or ultimate consequences and stuff like that. But it does feel like, and again, I hate all roads seem to lead back to Ukraine. And maybe they kind of need to, because I feel like the war in Ukraine, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, changed the landscape. It really threw everyone for the curve. It threw a curveball in everyone's, all the talking heads, all the experts, blew everyone's opinions and ideas out of the water. Very few people were right.
Yeah.
So when I see this now, it doesn't feel as much of a dismissive thing to say, oh, they will pay the price, or North Korea is calling these things provocative. Like now it feels like, maybe I'm wrong, but it feels like the world is upping the ante a little bit. Like maybe the tough talk is becoming, maybe we're prepared to put a little more behind the tough talk and actually put our money where our mouth is. What do you think, Jack? I mean, what do you think about stuff like paying the price and all this other stuff?
Well, yeah, to be clear, I'm not exactly sure what this recent spat between North and South Korea is over, or I should say what North Korea hopes to gain from it. We talked a little bit about why North Korea ratchets up the tensions every so often with Dave, but I'm not familiar with what just happened in the last 24 hours. I'd have to read up on it, but I think that all of the
we want your completely reckless, uneducated opinion about world matters, no matter how insane it is, Jack. You don't get to study.
We're all gonna die. I mean, I think every indication coming out of Washington, D.C. is that we are reorienting ourselves back to the future, so to speak, to state versus state conflict, back to, whatever buzzwords we're going to use this year, near peer adversaries, hybrid warfare, whatever the hell you want to call it. But, the global war on terror is taking a backseat to Russia, China, maybe Iran, maybe North Korea. We're reorienting back towards that posture. And I think in Ukraine, you've seen the United States government do something that it's been preparing to do for 75 years. And, unlike 9/11, we're like, I mean, let's be honest, we were caught with our pants down. It took us another 10 years or more to find bin Laden. We screwed up in Iraq, over and over again, but in Ukraine, it's the level of competency shown by our intelligence community in our military and our NATO alliance is actually a little shocking to see after the war on terror and how many times we screwed it up. Although, we did do very competent things and get our act together during the war on terror. I'm not trying to throw too much shade, but let's be honest, we also screwed up a lot. Whereas in this conflict with Russia, it seems like, the CIA knows what Russia's going to do before Russia even knows what they're going to do. Like we're so deep inside their system, we can predict all of their, they're telegraphing all their punches and we know exactly what they're going to do. And I don't even know the full story about how we're doing that, but I think it's pretty impressive to see it play out. So what does this mean? Like, yeah, when you look at North Korea, when you look at Taiwan, when you look at, this tensions heating up between Saudi Arabia and Iran, what does this mean? Does this signal something new? Does this conflict in Ukraine send a message about other conflicts around the world. There are some people who have made the argument that we fought so hard in Vietnam, not because we cared about Vietnam per se, but because we were trying to telegraph a message to de Gaulle and to our NATO partners in Western Europe that, hey, America is not a paper tiger, that we will stand against communism. We're going to, in that context, we're going to stop the dominoes from falling. And did we sacrifice 50,000 American soldiers in Southeast Asia to make that point? That's another terrible question to contemplate. But are we digging in our heels in Ukraine in order to prove a point to the Chinese, to prove a point to the North Koreans, to prove a point to the Iranians? And obviously it matters for Europe as well. But is there a bigger message we're also trying to telegraph here, that like we're done playing games and we let the Russians and the Chinese eat our lunch for the last 20 years? Are we signaling that a page has turned? Like, we are in a new chapter of history now. And I would argue that we are.
We go back to the opinion expressed by some early insurgency, some early terrorists. And I want to say it might have been, I don't remember who said it, one of these terrorist leaders, talking about that fact that Americans, they can't take a bloody nose. The minute blood is shed, we become very skittish, and we will jump out of the fight. And we saw that during, certain parts, and it's arguable that's what happened with Afghanistan and Iraq. We could not stay in the long term. We couldn't fight the long fight. Not that we couldn't, we didn't want to. Politics didn't want American forces to stay any longer and sustain any more losses, so we pull out. What does this have to do with the price of tea in North Korea? Well, what it has to do with everything in the price of tea in North Korea. Paul Bunyan, Operation Paul Bunyan, and maybe I'm tying too loose a thread here, but Dave Maxwell talks about Operation Paul Bunyan. 2 American officers brutally murdered by a gang of North Korean soldiers. All they were trying to do was chop down a tree, so they could, you could see past the bush, the branches and all this other stuff. Chopping down a tree to get brutally murdered. What do? We send in special operations guys in the dead of night to chop down this tree, regardless of which. Now, I think it's kind of interesting that that's how we used our special operations dudes at the time. But it did prove a point. Like, we will not be, yes, you killed our guys. We will not be stopped. We want that tree gone. We're going to make that tree gone. Even if it takes Navy SEALs to do it, we're going to make this tree gone. Maybe this is an evolution of Paul Bunyan.
I think it's like I said, it's turning a page. And when you're dealing with, North Korea is a criminal regime. I mean, it's rightly called a criminal regime, but I mean, some of these, the Iranian government, the Russian government, I mean, they're run by thugs. And, the way to deal with a bully is you have to stand up to them. And right now, the Ukrainian people have shown the entire world how you deal with a bully. You turn their ass around and you send them right back where they came from. It's pretty impressive to watch them do that. So yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I mean, I'm not a warmonger. At least I hope I'm not, but, and I believe in diplomacy and negotiations and everything whenever possible. But listen, if the enemy's only language they understand is violence, then that's the one that we have to speak to them in sometimes.
I am a warmonger. Kill them all. Let God sort them out. Yeah, that's the tough guy stuff, right? That's what gets the kids clicking on the clickbaits. Jack, that was a great story. I really appreciate you bringing that to us. Huge thanks to Dave Maxwell, folks.
Yeah, he's great.
Dave is one of those guys that I hate. Special forces guy, super tough, and then on top of it, he's super smart. Hey, Dave, leave some for the rest of us.
Yeah, Dave's a real intellectual, and if you want to know how special forces should conduct unconventional warfare and meet some of the threats that we're facing in the rest of this century, people like Dave Maxwell, their voices need to come to the forefront. You should go and ask people like Dave, some of the other OGs out there, some of the Detachment A guys who worked in Berlin, some of the OGs, they know how to clap back on global communism. And I think there's some lessons we can learn there.
I think that you hit it on the point. Global communism. Folks, communism's making a comeback, and the kids are into it. All right. Tell your kids, don't vape and stop commie stuff. All right. Stop with the communism. Put away your Che Guevara shirts. Putin is not your friend. And the people's revolution should be televised so that everyone can see it get crushed. It is not a good thing. So I think some of these OGs will tell you, they'll show you the consequences of communism. They'll show you the consequences of fascism. It runs both ways. So thank you, Dave Maxwell. Just a real treat to actually listen to somebody whose thoughts are just so well put together, so well good use of words. His words were good. I like his words. Folks, make sure you go check us out on social media. You can find Jack Murphy on Twitter at Jack Murphy RGR. You can find me at RodPotRod. And as always, you can save 50% off your digital subscription to Stars and Stripes by using promo code podcast. And that's it. Just like that. 50% off.
Awesome.
You wouldn't get that into People's Revolution. I'll tell you that right now. All right, folks. I'm Rod Rodriguez. That was Jack Murphy, and we will see you at the next episode. This episode is brought to you by Sabio, the #1 coding bootcamp for veterans. Visit sabio.la/military to learn more.